Hello, everyone. This is Seth from the world of paleoanthropology. I'd like to say I'm fresh back from the AABAs, but I did catch whatever was going around, so I'm feeling a little under the weather. But I am so excited today because I have a guest that have been waiting for. Scheduling has been a little weird, but I'm so glad to have him on. We have Dr. Petraglia. There we go.
There you go.
Maybe.
Petraglia, that's correct.
There you go. Yes. Okay. I did it. Um, And I'm very excited to have him on because not only is he a very in the news scientist, he's got a lot of new things coming out, a lot of important and evidence based things coming out, unlike some of the more just pop culture things that are we see in the media. And then, of course, there's this whole new thing going on, this consortium at Griffith University that maybe we'll touch on that we didn't just talk about for a second, but that would be great to just touch on for a moment. And then, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And I mean, you have an amazing background behind you. Maybe a few people can guess where you are, but why don't you tell us kind of, who you are, where you are?
Sure. I'm in Brisbane, Australia, and I'm the director of the Australian Research Centre for Human Evolution based at Griffith University. And I thought I'd do this interview at my house because I've got the bush behind us. And so maybe your guests can appreciate that a little bit. And maybe if we're lucky, we'll see a king parrot or something like that fly in during the interview.
That'd be very cool. So that would be the first time I think wildlife would have intervened or gotten into one of my videos. So that would definitely be special. So that would be very cool. So you are, I would say, in as far as I know, now I don't know everyone, of course, but you are definitely in the top five of the most active published authors in the field that I know. You cover a range of topics that is one the range and the how in depth you go really impresses me because it's clear that even though you are covering so many topics and areas, you're going and spending so much time and detail making sure that what you are putting out is of the same quality each time. And I think that is admirable. And when we look to science, that's what we need to see. How do you think you got to that position where you're in a place where you can publish that much? And is there a level that you hold yourself to that you think causes this? Or what's your drive here, I guess I'm asking.
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. That's really kind of you. I don't think of myself that way sometimes, but I don't know. It's through a lot of hard work. I mean, listen, I've been around for a number of decades now, but the first few decades of my career really, there was a lot of work involved and a lot of and no recognition really, and some of it. In fact, the early part of my career, I found it very hard to get an academic job. So I spent many years bridging the divide between academic research, in which I was working a lot through the Smithsonian because I had a research position there, and originally a postdoc. And then what I was doing over the years is working through the Smithsonian, working in places like India. But in order to make a living, I turned to cultural resource management, CRM. And so I worked with a heritage management firm in Washington, D.C., which allowed me to also pursue my work and research at the Smithsonian. So I did that for many years. And it was very difficult. It was really difficult trying to do both. Um, but in doing so, I learned a lot of skills on both sides of the equation. And those skills were the seed for what became what I do today, in the sense of on the CRM side, I learned a lot about practical skills and
Mhm.
deadlines, working
Right.
with people to achieve a goal. And that's stuff I never learned in graduate school. um,
Yeah,
and I learned all sorts of skills with respect to working with people, working with budgets, managing people, executing field work in a short time, sometimes with a lot of money, but a short time, and those skills, helped me to do the large projects that I do now that are purely research based. But at Smithsonian, I had a huge opportunity because as I worked there, I kept with research, and I was doing field work in India, which was very rare in terms of doing Paleolithic
right.
work. But it was really not as recognized, even though I was doing all of that. It wasn't really well recognized because India wasn't part of the human story, and it's
Hmm.
still played to this day. But I had been doing that, and I was lucky also at Smithsonian because I was based there. I ended up looking at all their worldwide collections, and I ended up writing a book with Rick Potts on the Paleolithic collections of the Old World um, at the Smithsonian. So that also exposed me to looking at all these things and thinking
Absolutely.
about other parts of the world as well.
I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Potts last year at the ABAs, so it's literally about a year ago. I don't think I saw him this year, but he was very nice guy. Definitely well known, like knows what he's talking about. I'm trying to say.
Right.
Um,
Well, I did my postdoc under Rick, and then I've been associated with the Smithsonian Human Origins Program ever since, which has been a great thing, but also important because of the opportunities and the connections and the networks that I was able to build as well. Because of course, Smithsonian has those global connections with people and partners. So that was a great thing for me as well.
Absolutely. The Just from the small interactions that I've had with the Smithsonian, they are beyond just the resources they have for the public. For people who are in the field, they are a great resource of, as you said, networking and communication. And I highly suggest if you are looking for resources, audience, if you're listening, the Smithsonian Human Origins site has tons of great information. And the person who runs the social media right now, well, actually, I don't know, does she? I don't know if she does, but Dr. Brianna Pobner, does she run social? I don't know. She might.
Well, she runs the Human Origins Program outreach program, essentially. Yeah.
Okay. So she is amazing. She's been on the show, so I highly suggest going to her if you are interested in a lot of what the Smithsonian is doing. But what led you from there to where you are now?
Okay.
At
So after about living
or
in,
was there something? Yeah.
yeah, no, there was a key moment in a sense because as I was indicating to you, it was difficult to do that, but I did it for 14 years. And I climbed the ladder in the cultural resource management world. I was a manager of a very large cultural operation, which did work all across the United States. So again, those skills really built up there, but it was a very difficult thing. And also I wanted to teach. I really wanted to teach. And I didn't have an opportunity in that kind of career that I had carved out to do that. And I really wanted to do research 100% of my time. That drove me.
Mm,
Um, so I was publishing slowly but surely, and on India in particular, the Paleolithic of India. And then I saw a job opportunity after many years of not applying for any other jobs. I saw a job opportunity. Or actually, it came to me. It came to me in an email through Rob Foley of the University of Cambridge, and he sent out an email to colleagues, and it said, there's a lectureship at Cambridge, and if you know anyone, apply." And so I knew Rob Foley because he had visited University of New Mexico, where I was a PhD student, and I got to know him there. And I wrote back to Rob and I said, "Might I apply?" And so Rob said, "Absolutely." And so, make a long story short, I ended up taking a lectureship, my first actual teaching role in academia in university was at University of Cambridge back in 2001. And so that was a very critical moment because I came into a new center for human evolutionary studies, headed by Rob Foley and Marta Lahr. And but I was thrown into the deep end
Hmm.
because I was an archaeologist by training.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I was in a department of biological anthropology. And I had to teach something about fossils and genetics, the new field of genetics, and fields, subfields, and subdisciplines that I had absolutely no idea about.
Right.
But that's really crucial because it was really formative for me because as an archaeologist, I was forced to engage in other fields, especially in biological anthropology, and integrate it into what I understood and knew, but also in my own research. And so that was a critical moment because it opened up the whole world of interdisciplinarity to me
Right.
and teaching about human evolution in its broadest way. And that skill set was really important because it's a skill set that I've used up to the current day, basically.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that moment when people realize how interdisciplinary it needs to be, it's just very critical. And I know there are older ways of doing things where it wasn't so interdisciplinary, and seeing the shift, even since I've been covering the field, has been amazing. So,
And it's hard to know everything, right? So you're not
abs- yeah,
so it's because you can't know everything, that's where teamwork comes in and collaboration. And if you ever look at my publications, you will see a diversity of scholars, from different angles, different fields coming together to tell the human story, right? Because, I can know only so much in terms of
right.
those disciplines, but bringing people together, on a mission, is the way forward to try to tell that common story and building strong teams of scientists.
Absolutely, because I'm sitting here trying to think of the many ways, and there's just so many. I had to stop, but there's so many ways of looking at what makes humanity humanity, and when you're trying to look at it in the past, like you're saying, you can't know everything, and there could be so many different specialties that can tell you even just a sliver more about what it meant to be human a million years ago. And without that specialty, looking at that site, we would never have that information. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, when colleagues that I work with, whether they're isotope experts or geochronology specialists or geneticists, and they come up with something new and different as part of our teamwork, I'm like, wow, I would have
yeah,
never, of course, thought of something like that. And that's what builds our publications too, right? When you have that great network and that great team and that people coming at it from different angles, that's why I'm lucky enough to publish very broadly as well.
so this sounds like, if you would like, it would be a good time to just briefly mention what's going on at Griffith and the new group that you have been partially responsible in putting together, and anything you'd want to say about that. I think now would be a perfect time.
Yeah, so the Australian Research Centre for Human Evolution, ARCHE for short, is something that's been around since about 2016 formally. So I took the directorship up about 2 years ago. And so it's a group of people that are really excellent that work all over the world, particularly in Australia and surrounding regions, and just really top scientists. I mean, they're in the pages of Nature and Science all the time. So it's a really great group of people. It's also interdisciplinary, so it's a very interdisciplinary center. So has geneticists, has biological anthropologists, has archaeologists, and all that. So when I got headhunted for the role, I was very happy to
Mhm.
come here because I already knew the fine reputation of the group. Um, But in coming here, we're in a sense getting more ambitious. We want to do bigger and better things. And so we start to think about longer term opportunities, not just sort of project by project or individual by individual, but really thinking about more broadly, programmatically, what we want to do. And so we got together with on some strategy meetings and looked at our strengths, and it was very clear that a lot of the scholars in Archie worked in the area of looking at Homo sapiens, the origins, and dispersals. And so we thought, okay, well, this is a really excellent topic, of course, as we know.
Mm-hmm.
What else could we do? What else could we do to really improve the human story? And so we thought about building a consortium of scholars, not only Archie itself at Griffith, but also what could we do? And so we thought about major funding, long-term funding. And so we've built a consortium of 7 Australian universities and more than 20 partners worldwide over the
Wow.
last year or so, to look at Homo sapiens, our origins, our migrations around the world, how climatic variability has affected us, all the things that are important with respect to looking at our history and evolution. But we're also taking a very unusual and what I think is a very important um, um, sort of angle on our research, and that is we aim to work very closely with members of the Global South, organizations and people, but also to work very closely hand in hand with Indigenous people to bring both Indigenous people and the Global South into the story more. Work in terms of actual work, and partnerships and training and publication and trying to tell slightly different stories about our origins and our migrations around the world because we are working with people with different perspectives. So there's both a Western science perspective as well as a global South perspective and an indigenous perspective that we're trying to bring to the table.
And before I continue, real quickly, behind you, a bird did land on a branch. I'm curious because it looks large from here and it's quite far away. So,
I
what am
think
I
that was
looking?
that was a white bird. I think I saw in my screen, and
Yeah,
that
yeah, it's still
a
there.
cockatoo. Could you see him?
Okay,
Okay.
I can barely see it, but I just
Hey,
saw something.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Okay, they may be in the trees, but maybe we'll be lucky and get him to land
Oh,
right behind me. Oh,
oh.
he's on the railing near me. I don't want to look at him because he'll probably start to land right on our on my laptop. The
but so
fauna and flora, I have to say here, is
yeah,
amazing.
I bet.
Why people like Wallace were stunned when they traveled around the world and saw a completely different world, in Southeast Asia and Australia. I think it's 70% of the fauna and flora of Australia is in this endemic fauna is only found in this part of the world.
Right.
So it's like a different planet in some ways.
It's that's what I've heard about from people who have experienced that part of the world who did not grow up there. It's just so it's alien
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah, and that's what, inspired, I think, people originally to start thinking about how did this other world get formulated and inspired theories of an evolution even, so
Absolutely. Yeah.
mm,
It's these things that get people thinking that we don't really think end up being the root of such formal and advanced theories. It's just someone sitting there going, "Why does that look different?" You know,
right,
it really can end up being something so simple. So,
exactly.
going back slightly, so that consortium sounds amazing. The goals and the sources and resources that it sounds like you guys have really sounds like it's going to be a force in human evolution and paleoanthropology going forward. And I think it is very interesting and of note. and a good thing that we might be seeing a shift in where academia is centered and coming from, aka Europe and Britain. Um, just anywhere else, honestly. But it's nice to see somewhere where there is such a large indigenous population that, as you mentioned, is a goal to get involved. I believe that we should not be doing work. As someone who did so much work in CRM, I'm sure you'll agree with this. I don't believe we should be doing work about people unless it involves the people. We shouldn't
Absolutely.
be thinking of ways to change or preserve something unless we talk to the people who are in need. And
Absolutely.
that's great that you guys at the center of what you want to do is involve so much of the indigenous population. So
And it's
kudos for
essential.
that. Yeah,
Essential. It's
absolutely.
absolutely fundamental now. I don't see how you can operate without including, local communities, global South partners, and
Hmm.
everything we do. I mean, that's, in a sense, that's what I've been trying to do in some of my own research, but this actually formalizes it,
Right.
uh, and makes it absolute. And that's what I want to do, as part of the consortium, is make that central, that we can't do our work without it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that might set you guys apart from a lot of different organizations that are currently out there that, in my opinion, may be faltering in their mission on what they're doing.
Well,
But so change.
we've got to
What?
change, and we've got to change the way we do business, and that's what it's all about. Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. So, changing focus a little bit, you had a paper come out recently that was talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, the archaeology of arrowheads that was found in. I should have reviewed this right before we talked. Why don't you tell me what it was about so I don't totally mess this up?
I'm not sure which article you're talking
Okay,
about,
I
quite
know.
honestly.
Okay, that was something else we joked about. You come out with so many articles that I was. It's just, yeah, it's great. It's amazing. But the
I,
one about that involved Toba and the volcanic
okay, that wasn't
supervolcano.
my paper. There's a paper that just came out last week in
Oh,
Nature.
was it?
It's not my paper. I
Oh,
commented on that in the literature,
well, you
but
said we
that's
could talk
okay.
about
That's
it, so let's
okay.
talk about
It's a topic near and dear to my, heart, so I could talk about it.
it.
And there's a new site in Ethiopia that came out in Nature last week, which had cryptotephra, so small shards of glass of a volcano, at the Toba caldera. That these shards came into this archaeological site in Ethiopia. And Toba, the volcano, is dated to 74,000 years ago. And it's one of the largest volcanic eruptions in the last 2 million years. And it blew its top in Sumatra 74,000 years ago. And so this article talked about finding Toba ash in this archaeological site in Ethiopia. Now, I commented to the media on that, because something like, back in, I think it was 2007, I wrote an article on one of the first article on Toba and archaeology, which we found together in India, and it was published in Science. And it was a very big story back then because it was associating ash, Toba ash, with archaeology. There were a lot of theories about Toba and a
Mhm.
lot of big, sort of stories in terms of Toba's effect on human populations and environment prior to our work. And they were really popular. And these arguments were that Toba um, affected Earth's climate so much that it led to an environmental catastrophe 74,000 years ago. It initiated global cooling, and they called it a volcanic winter.
Mhm.
And the argument was that it wiped out all of our ancestors or most of our ancestors, and it almost drove us to extinction. Homo sapiens.
I think
And
it
we
was something
only
like that.
survived in Africa and were small populations that came through Toba. And so this was a very popular theory, except that when we did our field work in India, we found an archaeological site called Jawapuram where we found Middle Paleolithic artifacts above the ash and below the ash. And those Middle Paleolithic artifacts were almost identical before the ash and above the ash. So if Toba drove all these populations to extinction in Asia, we argued, with the first evidence, first association, that we had continuity of hominins through the ash. And so we argued in that paper there was continuity of populations, and Toba did not drive populations to extinction in Asia. And so this went against very popular theories, and I've been in that debate ever since. So that Nature paper that came out is one of very few articles that have ever been published associating ash with archaeology.
Okay. So then what was this new paper saying?
Okay, so the new paper is about persistence of populations in Africa through the Toba volcanic supereruption. But in particular, they argue for an increase in aridity after Toba, which we know that, after Toba, that there was what's called marine isotope stage 4, which was an arid period in southern latitudes. And they argue in that paper that that aridity, um, in a sense, increased flexibility of populations,
Mm,
because what they found was that people, even though the perennial streams were no longer operational, that there was seasonality where all these rivers dried up, and people could only live along sort of water holes,
mm,
but drove their innovations, i.e., hunting abilities, innovations in terms of projectile technologies, which you brought up originally, and fishing along these water holes. And then that initiated out of Africa ultimately. So I commented in the media, places like New York Times and Washington Post. I said, great article. I'm happy to see it. A lot of hard work. And I really find their findings fascinating. But I'm not so clear on what they call I think the blue highway corridor out of Africa. And I'm not sure that that single explanation really holds water, because I think out of Africa was a very complicated process.
right.
So anyway, I criticized it a bit, and the background to that too is one thing that I should bring up is that I really got into debates once I published that work in India, because we not only argued that populations were continuous through the ash at 74,000 years ago, but we argued that who was it? Who was there making that Middle Paleolithic in India? And we argued it was Homo sapiens. And when we
Okay.
published it a long time ago, there was very little evidence from either a genetic or fossil perspective Homo sapiens was even there. So, and we don't have fossils in India to prove it. But what we did was we had some Chris Clarkson, who's at the University of Queensland. He's amazing lithicist, and he has global databases on lithics. And he took make a long story short, he took our stone tool technologies in India and compared them to stone technologies around the rest of the old world. And he found that our technologies were more similar to sub-Saharan populations being produced by Homo sapiens than they were to, for example, Neanderthal populations. And in that science article, we argued it was not only populations living through Toba, but it was Homo sapiens living through Toba. And that got me into debates with geneticists, human paleontologists, other archaeologists, environmental scientists, and we're still working on it. So we have a couple articles on Toba that have just been submitted on India to major journals. So we'll see. So that story is still being told.
I mean, in my limited knowledge of the field, I don't see why not. That seems like a complete possibility. Every other year, we see earlier dates in Europe of our first Homo sapiens in Europe. We see arrowheads all of a sudden 55,000 years ago, 55,000 years ago in France. I don't know. I feel like why not? We know there were other migrations out.
And when I started, there was a very popular one high impact paper after another was on the southern dispersal route. And the argument was that people only dispersed once out of Africa,
Right,
that it was rapid, they used coastlines, and it was 60,000 years ago. So this very
right.
precise story about out of Africa. And when I came into the equation, that was the predominant theory, the consensus. But when I came in, I was just like, "You sure?" Because nobody had worked in India, like, and testing this theory. So I had been working in India, and I was testing that consensus. And that's why I said that became controversial once I started arguing against this very popular theory. But also, that's what drew me to Arabia, to look at that, consensus view relative to what we knew in Arabia and India and this process of out of Africa.
Yes. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you mean by Arabia? Because I know a lot of people might be scratching their heads when you say that, because only a little bit is known publicly about what you're about to talk about. Oh, I see tail feathers. And oh, I,
Can I move my camera?
yeah, go for it. Oh, beautiful.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. That's so cool. Yeah.
That's the cockatoo. Yeah. Amazing bird. Sometimes there's dozens of them flying around here.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's stunning.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, so tell us about Arabia. What do you mean?
Yeah. So first of all, so Arabia, the modern countries of Saudi Arabia is like 90% of the peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula.
Right.
So Saudi Arabia is where I work, but there's also the Gulf countries like the UAE, and then there's Oman to the south. So I've mostly been working regularly in Saudi Arabia. My first visit was in about 2001, but I've been working there regularly since about 2010, doing multiple seasons, sometimes in a year, but at least once a year since 2010. So these are very large projects done in coordination with the Saudi Ministry of Culture and the Heritage Commission, and we've just been doing very large projects in order to look at the last 1 million years of hominin history there. Um, and before, so why did I go to Arabia?
Mm.
Because if you just look at a map of, just look at a map, pull out a map, look at Africa and look at Asia. And if you're thinking about migrations out of Africa, where might you travel? Well, Arabia is hard to avoid,
It
right?
definitely seems we skipped that area in research.
Totally skipped, totally
Yeah.
skipped. So when I came and I wanted to look at Arabia, first of all, colleagues said, Mike, you're nuts. Why would you do that? A, there's not going to be a lot of archaeology. And B, if you do find any, it's not going to be stratified. They're going to be surface sites, so the conditions won't be great. So you'd be wasting your time and your efforts, and this will sidetrack you. So I actually had a lot of negative reaction to doing it. But luckily, I applied for grants to the Leakey Foundation and the National Geographic, and I got them right away. And I said, I want to go there, and I want to do field work.
Yeah.
And I was happy. I got that seed money, and literally we got out there. We jeeped to what we thought was an ancient lake out there, and literally opened the doors to the jeep and started stepping on Paleolithic artifacts on an ancient lake deposit. And that was the first sign of the potential of Arabia in the Out of Africa story to me, because we were in the heart of Arabia, literally the Nafud Desert, which is a vast desert
Right.
in northern Saudi Arabia. And we were in the middle of a hyper-arid desert, and there was an ancient lake bed with artifacts in it. So, and now wind up to today, we now have dozens of stratified sites over the last 500,000 years,
Oh,
um, basically retelling the story of the central story of Arabia in human evolutionary studies and out of Africa dispersal processes through time. Um,
absolutely.
and you know, a lot of the story was about um, people sidestepping Arabia either through the coastlines or avoiding Arabia entirely to go to the Levant or Israel, only because we knew there were fossils and archaeology there. Why did we know there were fossils and archaeology there? Because people have been working there for 100 years steadily. And so we have
So,
a very biased story of out of Africa.
right, of course. So when you stepped out of the vehicle and on that ancient lake bed and you realized, okay, we have a whole new area that could have a whole new story to tell. As an archaeologist who, you were trained, you've been working in archaeology for a while, you probably have heard all the stories about archaeology, classical archaeology and everything. How did it feel to be like, okay, we have a whole new area that's been untouched by archaeologists that we know of?
Yeah. So previous surveys had been done, and they had shown that there was Paleolithic archaeology in the
Okay.
country. I did have that, and I wrote an article before I started doing that actual field work. I wrote an article together with my colleague Abdullah Al-Sharek in Antiquity, and we
Okay.
summarized all the surface finds of Arabia and said, you know, there's huge potential here, folks, you know, to actually try to find datable and stratified sites. So we knew there was potential. And that's why, you know, Leakey Foundation and National Geographic, I think, funded us, that because there was
Right.
potential. So people had done some hard work there before. But what wasn't done was to find well-preserved sites. That's hard to
Mm.
do, not easy. And so what we did, which I think was really innovative, um, was as soon as we started to do our work, we started to involve colleagues who did remote sensing work.
Mm.
And to this day, we still work with them. This is Nick Drake and Paul Breeze out of King's College London, and they're wonderful. They're great at remote sensing, and they started looking at satellite imagery.
Right.
And I remember asking Nick, I said, well, how, you know, we have all these surface sites in the heart of Arabia. How did hominins get there? So Nick went away and he looked at satellite imagery. And then I got an email with attachments, and he said, well, they walked there. Uh, and they walked along rivers, and they walked along, and
Wow.
they lived along lakes. And so he started showing me all the satellite imagery of ancient lake beds and ancient rivers. And there's a whole network of rivers and lakes all across Arabia. It's just that they're not operational today.
Right.
Uh, and they were operational many times in the past. And this is what we call Green Arabia
Yes.
today. The public
Yes.
loves that term, Green Arabia, Green
Green
Sahara,
Arabia. Yes.
because you have to imagine a different world, a completely different world than the stereotypical desert that we know today.
Absolutely.
And so when the remote sensing work got done, this was a huge predictive tool, right? So now Paul Breeze did a PhD on that, and Paul amazingly came up with these maps of huge networks of rivers throughout Arabia. But amazingly, he counted 10,000 paleolakes of Arabia.
Wow,
10,000.
that's insane.
Insane. And we've only been to about 300 of them so far.
Okay, right.
Guess what? 70% of those 300 have archaeology or fossils on them.
And so you can extrapolate that and
Go ahead, do the math.
yeah,
You know, we
that
have dozens
yeah.
of archaeological sites on each lake. Sometimes we've been working on that one lake deposit called Juba
Mhm.
since 2010 consistently, and we have sites of every age, from lower Paleolithic to historic era. Um, and it was a magnet, this lake in the Nafud. So it brought hominins there and biomass there many times in the past. So lakes and lake beds were coming and going through time, right? They would swell and they would dry up. They would swell and then dry up. And this was the engine for out of Africa, because you know animals would be following these landscapes. So it was not only
Right.
having
First.
potable water, it would be savannas and grasslands which would draw in the animals, like you see in East Africa today, and Sahara and Arabia would have looked like that many times in the past, those savannas that we're so fascinated by, with giraffes and other animals. And amazingly, you know what? We have on those lakes, we have hippos. So not only could humans and hominins move out of Africa, but so did hippos.
And aren't if I'm thinking correctly, isn't there some rock art? No, that's camels. It's not giraffes. Never mind.
We have rock art all over the place, also.
But
Yes.
you have there's none of giraffes though, right? I'm thinking of camels
Now,
though.
giraffes are in the Sahara. There's a
Right.
lot of
So I'm
giraffes.
thinking of camels in
Yeah,
rock art
we
there.
we have lots of camels, and so does Sahara. But camels are We have wild camels, which was a novelty a few years ago. So we have this amazing rock art specialist. Her name is Maria Guagnan, and she's been working on rock art for more than a decade now. And she has actually been able to see the transition between wild camels and
Oh,
domesticated camels
in the
in the
rock art.
rock
That's
through
amazing.
overlay of the rock art. And
Right
so that
now, I'm in a rock art research project, and that just fascinates me that that's observable over the work she's done. It's
amazing.
amazing.
It's amazing stuff that she can actually see in the rock art. She sees environmental change in the rock art too.
Mhm.
The things that you see, the hunter gatherers, the things they're hunting, is different than when people started incorporating domesticates into the rock art.
Yeah. And so is the rock
We have a
art
picture. We
that
actually have a
consistent?
picture of what it looked like.
Yeah,
That's what's about the
that's
rock
amazing.
art.
So it's that consistent through time that you can actually track like, there are people
Well,
consistently making it?
I think the oldest rock art we're happy to say is that we have rock art only like past the last, say, 15,000 years. We don't have
Okay.
really art.
Yeah.
But we can see that hunter gatherers were there after the
Right.
last glacial maximum, and they were even incorporating dogs in their hunting.
Oh,
So we can see
wow.
that. We see them with bows and arrows. We see they're working with dogs to hunt, creatures like oryx and
Mhm.
gazelle out there.
Oryx in
Yeah, we
Arabia?
have Arabian oryx. That's right.
Oh, that's cool.
Ibex and oryx were
Right.
very common.
Okay.
We actually see that literally. It's almost like a photograph. You
Yeah.
see it, so you can
That's
imagine what life was like.
yeah, that's astonishing. Well, with all of that, it has been such an amazing chat. I know you are such a busy guy, so I don't want to keep you any longer, but is there anything you would like to leave my audience with as a final goodbye?
No, I want to say just thank you very much to you. Number one, I really appreciate being on the show. I really enjoyed the chat. But I also want to promote, public outreach and promotion, and what you're doing is really excellent. Getting the word out to not only young people and potential, scholars and scientists of the future, but also the public. We have an obligation to get word out to the public about what we're doing, and you're what you're doing is admirable, and I really appreciate you doing that. I see a domestic cat in the screen. I think you have a cat there.
Is she breaking into the virtual?
We have all
Yeah.
sorts of creatures in this
You
interview. It's
know,
great,
you
right?
know.
But listen, I think what you're doing is great, and keep up the good work. I know this takes a lot of time and a lot of energy too, but it's really great to see vehicles like this for communication. So keep it up, and it's really a great thing you're doing. Yeah,
Well, I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for the kind words. Well, everyone, that is the end of this episode of The Story of Us. I hope you've enjoyed our guest. He was so informational and full of enthusiasm about what he's talking about. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and be ready for more episodes. See you guys next time.
thanks, Seth.
Bye.